Hey, I'm going to show you how to pick up stitches on a sleeve. This is the Newborn Vertebrae Cardigan that I have been knitting on. So as you can see here, we have the two little sleeves with the spare stitches on waste yarn, and I've worked the bottom rib, so now I need to do each sleeve and cuff, and then I'll come along and do the inside for the band at the front. Because when you go to pick up your stitches for a sleeve, it will recommend a certain number of stitches, which obviously this is what I've got on the waste yarn, so there's 44 stitches. But if I was just to pick up those 44 stitches, I would still end up with this hole, which is a pain because then you've got to come back and darn it shut, and it just looks messy and untidy, and who wants to come back and fix things when you could just do it from the beginning. Now if you can see here, if I can get this to focus, this blue yarn here, although it's part of the stitch, it's very loose, so if I was to grab that, it's going to stretch and put a hole anyway. So I need to start below that, just about here. So see the V of the knit stitch? I'm just putting my needle through that, and I pick it up, and then I'm going to pick up another 2 stitches. So there's another V below that blue. Oops. So it's a little bit fiddly, but sort of every second stitch. So if I can pick that up and then try and, which I just had it before, pick up this one. So then I have 2 stitches on the needle, 2 V's. So now I'm ready to pick up the stitches sitting on the waste yarn, just like as if they were on a needle. What I'm going to do, because when I put them on the waste yarn I tied a knot just to make sure they didn't slip off, I'm going to just snip that off. And as I put the stitches on, I will start to pull the waste yarn out just to make it less bulky. If I grab the other end of the circular needle, I'll just use it, or you can use a darning needle or your fingers if you're very dexterous. Oops, where is it? Don't want to pull the other stitches that don't need to come out, so I can just start to pull that out. It's a little bit fiddly at first, but once you get into the rhythm of it, oh, of course I should cut off the knot. Just be careful not to cut your actual piece, and pull that through. So we're just going to keep going along, slipping those stitches being held on the waste yarn onto the needle, like so. So when I get about halfway, I'm going to split for the magic loop method, and this will help me get round the corner with the stitches, otherwise it gets a bit tight because it's such a small area. So I'll be back in just a second. So as you can see, I have picked up the stitches, and they're now on the cable, and I've just pulled the needle right through, and that gives me a bit more room to work with to pick up the remaining stitches. So I've put 22 so far, plus the 2 that I picked up below the under the arm. So now we'll just continue on, and I just trim the excess yarn, waste yarn, as I go, just to make it easier for pulling it out, and just continue on threading those stitches onto your needle like so, pulling the waste yarn out. Oops, just being careful. Oops. Don't pull it right off till you've made sure it's definitely on there. I just keep my finger on the top just to hold it steady, otherwise I don't want it to slip off, because especially being metal needles, they're a lot slipperier. Slipperier? That is not even a word. A lot more slippery. The only thing I got these Novas recently, but there's a bit of a burr or something there which I'm not quite happy with, so it keeps catching, so I'll have to eventually get some newer needles. I probably won't get the Novas again. I did like them when I first started, but they seem to be, I don't know if you can see there, but they sort of got rougher and more discoloured, so I wasn't quite impressed with that. So Spotlight actually has some Addy needles now on offer, and I'm very impressed with that, so I'm going to try some Addy needles later on. So I'll just work my way through and I'll come back when I get to the end. Okay, so now I've put the stitches on both sides. So this just has the 22 stitches and this has the extra 2 here. So what I might do is just pull this back through again. Just pull the, pull the cable back through and just flick one of the stitches back over to, one of the stitches where I picked up the extra 2 over to this side. So that's how you split for the magic loop, and then just pull that back through. Careful not to knock the stitches off the needle. And so now we will have 23 on this side and 23 on this side. So we only need to decrease by 2 stitches, so that's 1 round. And then we'll be caught up to the recommended stitches for the sleeve, so then you just keep going around and around. So obviously you can see here where I've picked up the extra stitches. I've got the 2 V's here. That's going to be a little bit awkward the first round, but then once we've got them off the needle and knit them, it'll be smooth sailing. So what I normally do, obviously, to start off in the round is to flick 1 stitch off and the other stitch over so that they sort of join up. So I take the bottom one, very careful not to lose it, like so, and then I'm just going to pull this one over, this first V, carefully not pulling off the other stitch. Actually, it's a bit tricky. Oops, and pulled the other stitch off. Good one, Lisa. Okay, so not letting go of that stitch, pulling that one over. And this is probably where I should have got, wait, and I'll just pause and I'll get a darning needle. Right, so this is, other people probably do it far easier than I do, but this is just how I do it. So let's just take that needle out. So the blue one is the one I just added there from the other needle, and I'm just going to pop this one onto a spare needle, making sure I grab that blue yarn. There we go. Now I'm going to pull this one up so these don't fall off, and I'm going to grab this needle that I wanted to flick it onto. This is just to get it to go in the round, and we're going to pop it there. There we go. I'm sure other people do it a lot neater than I do, but anyway, this is just sharing how I do it in case you're struggling and you may find a better way. So now we're ready to cast on to start our round. Obviously we don't have any beginning yarn point, but the top needle with magic loop is the one with the working yarn, and we're going to knit the bottom row. So I'll just grab my yarn and we'll be right back. Right, now I'm back. So I've got my working yarn with the shorter end facing me, and then the working end there. So I'm going to pull the top needle out because this is the one I'm going to knit with. And we're going to come up, and this first round I'm not going to do the decrease. I'm just going to get going on the round, I think it'll be neater. So if I take this, see the 2 stitches here, that's the V stitch that I picked up from under the arm, so we want to make sure we capture both sides of the V. We're just going to loop this yarn around, give it a decent amount of tail. And what I usually do when I'm changing colours or starting a new piece of yarn, I just loop it over and knit as you would normally. Right. And I'm going to keep these 2 ends, the working end and the tail, together for 4 stitches. I'm going to knit 4 stitches just to work it into the knitting and make sure, make sure. So you will have 2 threads on the 1 stitch, just to make sure that it's all secure and not going to come undone. So usually 4 stitches is the most optimal. And then I'm going to make sure I'm dropping the tail and not knitting with the tail. This wee bit on here, I'm going to pull that towards me and grab the other bit, the working bit, and continue on with my round. And then the next round I will do the decrease, so I will knit 2 together after the first stitch. So just keep going around. And with magic loop you must make sure, like when we come around again, that you pull that very tight on the join, otherwise you'll get laddering. But once you get the hang of it, you will find magic loop is quite a nice way to knit with. I prefer it now. I used to knit with double pointeds, but now I prefer magic loop. I just find it less hassle. You're not got lots of needles that can slip out accidentally. You're not got 4 potential ladders. You've only got 2, and I just find it's much easier, and it fits in my bag better, in my project bag. So let's get here. I'll just show you. So we're nearly at the end of that side. So we're just knitting. Just pull that tail out of the way. Eventually I just roll up the tail, and just pop it down inside the armhole out of the way. Then you haven't got any worry of accidentally knitting it. So now we're going to turn our needles around, and the top needle is now the bottom needle. I'm going to pull the cable through. We're going to just pull this one, the top one, out and push our stitches up ready to knit. So see how we pull the cable through, and then you've still got your working yarn, and just make sure that your needle isn't on top, it is below the yarn. Okay, so we're going to pop our first stitch ready, and then see here with the cable, you're just going to pull that real tight to close that gap and make sure you keep a firm grip on it. And at first you will be quite tight with this, but eventually you'll get the hang of it, and then you just pop that off, just supporting the stitches for the first couple, and then you can relax a bit more, and then off we go. So the round's almost done, and if you need to, just pull a bit more cable out just to give you a bit more room. I find 60 to 80 centimetres optimal. Anything shorter you're really struggling to do the magic loop, because you have to have plenty of cable to allow you to stitch comfortably without pulling. And I found the other day I had too short a cable on, and I got a lot more, not full laddering, but there was a noticeable line there, where if I have a longer cable I've got a tighter grip on getting around the corners, and don't find I have, you can't really see where I've turned the corner. So now we're back here, and usually under the arm you can always put a progress keep if you just want to make sure you know where technically the end of the round is. Now see, I'm coming up to that original V stitch, the second stitch that I picked up, so we're just going to make sure we capture both of those in our stitch. So it might take a bit of fiddling, but you can see there, you can see there I've caught both of them. And then we're just going to knit that as normal. And this is the stitch we originally swapped over to join in the round, and we knit that one. And there you go. So then you just keep, now that we've done the first round, we can knit 2 together on this round at the beginning and the very end. Okay? Oops, I've just grabbed the tail out there. Let's just pop that back in. Get rid of it. We don't want to see it. As you go and make the sleeve longer, it'll be less able to catch. So now you've got your working yarn. We're going to pull the top one out and push this cable back in so we can knit this row. Start the round again. So this, we're back at the very beginning at the armpit. And push the stitches back on. Oops. Sometimes it's a bit hard to get it over the bump there. And then pull this top one out. So you always know that your working yarn, the bit that the cable that you pull out is where the working yarn